When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I can still see her standing there in my kitchen, the kitchen I'd cooked in for 40 years, with her arms crossed over her chest. The morning light was coming through the window, hitting the dust motes floating in the air, making everything look hazy, like a dream, or a memory. She had just finished telling me that my son, her husband, wanted me out, that my room was needed for the new baby, that I was too much trouble now, with my stiff knees and my forgetfulness. And I smiled. I looked her right in the eyes, and I gave her a small, gentle smile. She didn't know what that smile cost me. She didn't know it was the same smile I had used 30 years ago, in a place so dark that the sun was just a rumor. It was the smile you use when you have nothing left, and you realize that nothing can hurt you anymore because the worst has already happened. It's the smile of a woman who has already died once and is just waiting for her body to catch up. You see, my family, the one I built here in Ohio, they think they know me. They know I make the best apple pie in the county. They know I like my coffee black and my roses pruned before the first frost. They know I'm quiet. They think I had a boring, simple life before I met my husband, Carl. A little girl from a small town, that's what they think. But they don't know the woman I was before I became mom and grandma. They don't know that the reason I can survive anything is that I survived the unsurvivable, long before most of them were even born. When my son, Mark, came home that night, he didn't look me in the eye. He just shuffled past me in the hallway, mumbling something about the baby keeping them up. My grandson, little Tommy, he's the light of my life. The thought of not seeing him every morning, of not hearing his little feet pattering down the hall to my room, that was the knife. That was the pain that made the smile on my face feel like it was cracking. But I knew something they didn't. I knew that this was just a door closing. And I have walked through doors so dark and so terrifying that leaving a comfortable home in a safe neighborhood seemed like a walk in the park. So I started packing my small brown suitcase, the same one I had arrived with 40 years ago. And as I folded my floral print dresses and my worn-out cardigans, my hands started to remember. They remembered calluses from work I should never have had to do. They remembered the feel of another child's hand, a hand I lost long before I ever held my marks. But before we continue, I want to extend a very specially invitation to you subscribe the channel and leave a like. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories, and comment down below which city you are watching us from right now. Let's continue. My story doesn't start in this house. It doesn't start in this country. It starts in a whisper, in a language you wouldn't understand, in a place they don't put on postcards. And to understand why I could smile when my world fell apart for the second time, you have to understand how it fell apart the first time. So pull up a chair, get comfortable. This might take a while. I'm going to tell you a story I've never told anyone. The story of a brave woman, you say? No, I'm just a woman who learned that bravery is just another word for having no other choice. I was born in a tiny village in the mountains of a country that doesn't exist anymore. The name of it doesn't matter. What matters is that it was green. So green it hurt your eyes in the spring. My father was a good man, a farmer. He worked a small piece of land that had been in his family for generations. My mother was soft, like a loaf of fresh bread. She sang while she worked, old songs about the mountains and the rivers. We didn't have much. Our house was made of stone and wood with a roof that leaked when the snow melted. But we had each other. I had 2 older brothers, strong and loud, who would tease me and then protect me from any bully in the village. And I had a little sister, Alina. She was 4 years younger than me, with hair the color of honey and eyes like the sky after a rain. She was my shadow. Wherever I went, she followed. When I was 17, the soldiers came. Not all at once. First, it was just rumors, whispers in the market, talk of war, of changes. My father would sit by the fire at night, his face like stone, saying nothing. Then the soldiers came to our village. They were from the big city, from the government. They said they were there to protect us, but they took our chickens. They took our stored grain. They said it was a tax for our protection. My mother would hold Alina close when they walked through the village. She would tell us to look at the ground, to never meet their eyes. I didn't understand then. I was young. I thought they were just rude men in uniforms. When I was 19, I got married. His name was Stefan. He was a carpenter with hands that were rough but could carve the most beautiful little birds out of a scrap of wood. He wasn't from our village, but from the next valley over. He was quiet, shy even, but when he looked at me, his whole face would light up. We were married in the small stone church at the edge of the village. I wore my mother's wedding dress, simple white linen with wildflowers in my hair. Alina was my only bridesmaid. She was 15 then, just becoming a woman, and she cried more than I did. For 1 year, I was happy, truly, deeply happy. We had a small room in his family's house. Stefan would work all day, and I would help his mother in the garden and cook the evening meal. At night, when we were finally alone, he would hold me and talk about our future. About the house we would build one day. About the children we would have. A boy first, he said, to help him with the wood. And then a girl with honey-colored hair, just like my little sister. Then the real war came. It wasn't a war with front lines and news reports. It was a creeping, suffocating fog. One day, the soldiers in the village were replaced by different soldiers. These ones were harsher. Their uniforms were a different color. They didn't just take our food, they took our young men. My brothers were taken in the middle of the night. We heard the trucks in the dark, the shouting, my mother's screams. We never saw them again. Stefan was clever. He hid. Whenever we heard the trucks, he would slip out into the forest and stay with the partisans, the resistance fighters hiding in the mountains. He would come back in the dead of night, exhausted and hungry, and I would feed him and hold him and pretend I wasn't terrified every second he was gone. The winter of that year was the coldest I can ever remember. It was like the world itself was dying. The snow was so deep it covered the windows. The wind howled down from the mountains like a pack of wolves, and there was no food. The soldiers had taken it all. We were surviving on boiled roots and bark flour mixed into a paste. My mother-in-law grew weak first, then Stefan's father. We buried them in the frozen ground behind the house. We couldn't even dig deep enough. We just covered them with rocks and snow and promised to give them a proper grave in the spring. By early spring, it was just me, Stefan, my parents, and Alina. My parents had come to stay with us, their own home having been burned down for firewood by the soldiers. We were all huddled in one room trying to stay alive. I was pregnant. I hadn't told anyone but Stefan. It was too dangerous. A baby in times like this wasn't a blessing, it was a burden. A hungry mouth we couldn't feed, but it was our hope, our secret flame in the endless dark. I remember the night it all ended. The night that took everything. The wind had died down, and for the first time in months, the world was silent. An eerie, heavy silence. Stefan was holding me in the dark, his hand on my small, swollen belly. He whispered that the snows would melt soon, that the partisans had a plan, that we would be free. I believed him. I had to. And then we heard them. The dogs, not the gentle village dogs, but the deep baying howl of military hounds. They were close, too close. Stefan's body went rigid next to mine. He knew. This time there was nowhere to run. They had found us. The door didn't just break. It exploded. Wood splintered inward, and suddenly the room was filled with blinding white light from their flashlights and the deafening roar of men shouting. I remember the cold air rushing in, so sharp it felt like knives on my skin. I remember my mother screaming. I remember my father stepping in front of her, his old, thin body a useless shield. And I remember the dogs. Huge, dark shapes, their teeth bared, their growls vibrating in my chest. The soldiers shoved us all into the center of the room. They tore the place apart, looking for weapons, for anything. They found nothing. We had nothing. The officer was a tall man with a pale, clean-shaven face and eyes the color of slate. He looked at us like we were insects under a rock. He spoke our language, but with a harsh accent that made the words sound like insults. He wanted to know where the others were. The partisans, the men in the mountains. My father, his voice shaking, told him we were just farmers, just simple people trying to survive. The officer didn't believe him. He walked over to my father and, without a change in his expression, hit him in the face with the butt of his rifle. The sound was sickening, a wet crack. My father crumpled to the floor. My mother lunged for him, and another soldier roughly shoved her back. I stood frozen, holding on to Alina. She was trembling so hard I thought her bones would break. Stefan was beside me, his hand gripping mine so tightly it hurt. I could feel the rage coming off him in waves, the desperate urge to fight, but I held his hand just as tightly, willing him to be still, to live. The officer's cold eyes scanned the room. They passed over my parents, over Stefan, and then landed on Alina. She was 16. Even thin and pale from hunger, she was beautiful. Her honey-colored hair was matted, but it still shone in the harsh light. The officer smiled. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. It wasn't a human smile. It was the smile of a wolf that has found a lamb. He walked over to her. He reached out and touched her hair. I felt Alina flinch, and I pulled her closer, behind me. The officer's eyes flickered to me. He said something in his own language, and the other soldiers laughed. Then, in our language, he said, "The young one comes with us." No. The word exploded in my head, but it wouldn't come out of my mouth. My mother did. She screamed, "No, please, she's just a child." A soldier backhanded her, and she fell to her knees next to my father. Stefan moved. He let go of my hand and stepped forward, putting himself between the officer and us. "Take me," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'll go with you, leave the women." The officer looked at Stefan with mild curiosity. He was taller than Stefan, broader. He tilted his head. "You," he said. "No, we have no use for a carpenter. We have use for fresh things." He gestured to Alina. That's when my father, from the floor, raised his head. There was blood pouring from a cut above his eye, but his voice was clear. "She is promised. She is to be married. She is not for you." It was a lie, a brave, foolish, desperate lie, and it sealed our fate. The officer's face went dark. The amusement vanished. "Lies are a sickness," he said quietly. He looked at his men. He gave a short, sharp command in his language, and then chaos erupted again. 2 soldiers grabbed Stefan. He fought them, punching, kicking, but he was weak from hunger and there were too many. They beat him to the ground. I screamed and tried to get to him, but another soldier held me back. I watched them drag him out the door into the snow. Stefan looked back at me just once. His eyes were wide with fear, not for himself, but for me. And then he was gone. The officer turned back to us. "The girl," he said, pointing to Alina, "and the old women can come, they will work." He looked at my mother, still on her knees. "She can cook." He looked at me. "And you look strong enough." He pointed to my belly. "You will lose that soon enough. Hard work is good for that." They herded us out into the night like cattle. No coats, no shoes, but the thin, worn-out rags on our feet. The snow was deep and cruel. I held Alina's hand with one hand and reached for my mother with the other. My father was left behind. I don't know if he was already dead or if they just left him there to die. I couldn't look back. I couldn't. We walked through the night, stumbling, falling, being yanked back to our feet by the soldiers and their dogs. We walked towards the trucks, towards the unknown, towards the place where the sun doesn't shine. I whispered to Alina as we walked. I told her to stay close to me, to do what they said, to survive. I made her promise me. "We will survive," I hissed into her ear, my lips frozen. "Do you hear me, Alina? We will find each other and we will survive." She just nodded, her little hand like ice in mine. They packed us into the back of a truck, so many of us that we had to stand, pressed together. There were other women from other villages. We all wore the same look of shock and terror. The truck lurched and started to move. The canvas flap at the back was tied shut, plunging us into complete darkness. As we bumped along that frozen road, I felt a flutter in my belly, a tiny, quick movement like a butterfly trapped inside. Stefan's baby, our secret flame. I put my free hand over my stomach, and for the first time that night, I didn't pray for rescue. I prayed for the strength to be cruel, to be hard, to become whatever I had to become to protect the 2 lives I had left to protect, the one holding my hand and the one growing inside me. I didn't know it then, but I was leaving the girl I used to be on that dark, frozen road. They took us to a camp. It wasn't one of the big ones you hear about in the history books. It was a labor camp, deep in the forest, a place they wanted to forget. We were surrounded by tall fences topped with barbed wire that sang a mournful song in the wind. The guard towers were wooden and rickety-looking, but the men in them had guns, and they used them. Our days became a blur of hunger and exhaustion. We woke before dawn in a freezing cold barracks that smelled of unwashed bodies and despair. We were given a bowl of watery soup and a crust of bread, and then we marched out to work. Our job was to clear the forest, to cut down trees and haul the heavy logs to waiting trucks. The work was backbreaking. My hands, once soft from kneading bread, became a mass of blisters and then calloused, cracked claws. The The guards were cruel, but not in a dramatic way. It was a casual, everyday cruelty. They would shout, they would shove, and for the smallest mistake, stopping to catch your breath, dropping a log, they would whip you with a leather strap. You learned to keep your head down, to become invisible. My belly grew. At first, I tried to hide it under my loose, ragged clothes. But as the months passed, it became impossible. I was terrified. A baby in this place. It was a death sentence. For both of us. The other women in my barracks, some of them looked at me with pity, others with resentment. Another mouth to feed, even a tiny one, meant less for everyone. My mother was there with us. The work was killing her. She had always been soft, a homemaker. The hard labor, the cold, the lack of food, it was consuming her from the inside. She would cough all night, a deep, rattling sound that kept us all awake. But she stayed close to Alina and me. She was a ghost of the woman she used to be, but she was our ghost. Alina changed. The light in her eyes, the one that was as blue as the sky, it started to dim. She stopped talking. She did her work like a machine, her face blank. The guards noticed her too. The same way that officer had noticed her. They would find excuses to be near her, to speak to her. I tried to keep her by my side always, but they would separate us for work details. One evening, we were marched back to the barracks, more exhausted than usual. Alina wasn't with us. I waited by the door, my heart pounding. I asked the other women, but they just shook their heads and looked away. Finally, as darkness fell, 2 guards dragged her back. They threw her through the door of the barracks. She landed on the dirt floor and just lay there. I rushed to her. Her dress was torn. There were bruises on her arms, on her neck. Her face was white as paper, and her eyes were empty, completely empty, like a doll's eyes. I held her, rocking her, whispering her name. She didn't respond. She didn't cry. She just stared at nothing. After that, she was never the same. The men in the towers, the guards on duty, they came for her at night. She became a thing they used, and there was nothing I could do. Nothing. If I tried to protect her, they would beat me. Or worse, they would take her away to a place I couldn't follow. The only power I had was to be there for her afterwards, to hold her broken body, to whisper that I loved her, that she was still my Alina. But I'm not sure she heard me anymore. The winter passed and another spring came. The snow melted, turning the camp into a sea of mud. I was heavily pregnant now, so big I could barely move. The guards put me on lighter duties, peeling potatoes in the kitchen. It was a small mercy. One day, while I was working, a guard came and told me to follow him. My blood ran cold. I thought of Alina. I thought the worst. He led me not to the punishment block, but to a small, crude building near the fence. It was the infirmary. There was no doctor, just a woman, a prisoner like us, who had been a nurse before the war. She was old and tired-looking. She looked at me and just pointed to a filthy cot in the corner. It was time. The labor was long and hard. I was weak from malnutrition, and the pain was like nothing I could have imagined. The nurse did what she could, which wasn't much. I bit down on a rag to keep from screaming, because screaming attracted the guards, and the guards meant trouble. I thought of Stefan. I thought of our night together, his hand on my belly. I thought of our secret flame. And then, after hours of agony, I heard a cry, a thin, reedy little cry like a kitten. The nurse lifted a tiny, squirming bundle and placed him on my chest. A boy. He was so small, so red, with a tuft of dark hair just like his father. Stefan's son, my son. For one perfect moment, the world fell away. There was no camp, no barbed wire, no hunger. There was only him. I named him Daniel. It was my father's name, a name of strength. I held him and I promised him with every fiber of my being that he would survive, that I would find a way. For a few weeks, I was able to keep him hidden. I would wrap him in rags and keep him in the barracks during the day. The women in my hut protected us. They would stand guard. They would share their meager rations of bread with me so I could try to make a little milk. It was a tiny conspiracy of love in a place of hate. But you can't hide a baby forever. He cried, he was hungry, he was cold, and the sound carried. One night, a guard making his rounds heard him. He burst into the barracks, his flashlight blinding. He found me holding Daniel, trying to shush him. He looked at the baby, he looked at me, and then he smiled. That wolf smile. He didn't hit me, he didn't shout. He just smiled, turned, and left. The next morning, I was called to the commandant's office. I knew what was coming. I held Daniel so tightly, my heart was shattering into a million pieces. The commandant was a fleshy man with small, piggy eyes. He didn't look at me. He looked at some papers on his desk. "The baby," he said in his guttural accent. "It is a drain on resources. It serves no purpose." I fell to my knees. I begged. I pleaded in my language, in broken bits of his. I told him I would work twice as hard. I told him the baby would be a worker one day. I told him anything, everything. He just waved his hand. "There is a place for such things," he said. "A transport leaves tonight. He will go to a special facility for children." A special facility. I had heard whispers. It was a lie. A kind lie the guards told to make the mothers stop screaming. There was no facility. There was only the forest and a shallow grave. I knew it. He knew it. They took him from my arms. A guard simply pulled him away from me. Daniel started to cry, that tiny, helpless sound. The last time I saw my son, he was in the arms of a man in a dirty uniform, being carried out of a door into the gray, cold light of a day that would never end. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat on the floor of that office, my arms still curled as if I was holding him. The woman I was, the girl who had dreamed of a house and a family, she died right there on that filthy floor. Something in my brain just clicked off. It was like a door slamming shut in a dark house. The light was gone. All that was left was a shell, a body that breathed and walked and worked, but with nothing inside. When I walked back to the barracks that night, my mother took one look at my face and knew. She let out a wail, a sound of pure animal grief, but I had no wail left. I was empty. Alina was lying on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. She didn't even look at me. She was empty, too. We were two hollowed-out shells, my sister and I, and then she was gone, too. A few weeks after Daniel, they took Alina on a work detail to the forest, and she never came back. I searched for her. I asked everyone. No one would say. I like to think she ran, that she somehow got through the fence and disappeared into the trees. But in my heart, I know the truth. The forest was deep, and the guards had dogs. She had finally found a way to make the emptiness stop. I don't remember much of the next year. It was just a long, gray blur of work and silence. I became the perfect prisoner. I did as I was told. I never complained. I never cried. I never hoped. Hope was a luxury that could kill you. I was a machine that cleared forests and hauled logs and ate soup and slept. Then one day, the war ended. We heard rumors first, whispers that grew louder. And then one morning, the guards were gone. The towers were empty. The gate stood open. We just stood there looking at it. No one knew what to do. We were free, but we had forgotten what freedom felt like. It felt like fear, like a vast, empty space we didn't know how to fill. I walked out of that gate. I just started walking. I walked through the forest, through villages that were piles of rubble, through fields of weeds. I walked until I came to a road, and I kept walking. I was looking for something, but I didn't know what. Home was gone. My family was gone. My son was gone. I was a ghost in my own body. A relief organization found me eventually. They put me in a displaced persons camp. They gave me clean clothes and real food. They tried to help me, but I didn't want help. I wanted to disappear. They asked me questions. Where was I from? Did I have any family? I couldn't answer. The words were stuck behind that closed door in my mind. I lived in that camp for 2 years. I worked in the kitchens. I kept to myself. I learned to live with the emptiness. And then one day they came to me with an opportunity, a chance to start over. A family in America needed a young woman to help with housework. They would sponsor me, give me a new life. America, it sounded like a dream, a place so far away that the past couldn't follow. I said yes. I had nothing to lose. I got on a ship. I remember standing on the deck, watching the shore of Europe disappear into the fog, and I felt nothing. Not sadness, not relief, just nothing. I was leaving that woman in the camp on the frozen road in the barracks. I was leaving her behind. I arrived in New York and then took a train all the way to Ohio. The family I was to work for, the Millers, were kind people. They were older, their children grown. They gave me a small, clean room and paid me a little money. I learned English by listening to the radio and reading the newspaper out loud to myself at night. I learned to cook American food, meatloaf, casseroles, Jell-O salads. I was polite, I was quiet, I was grateful. but I kept everyone at a distance. I had built a wall around myself, brick by brick, and no one was getting in. Then I met Carl. He was a farmer, a friend of the Millers. He would come by to fix things, a leaky faucet, a broken step. He was a big man with big, gentle hands and a smile that was slow and easy. He talked to me, not at me, but to me. He asked me questions. What did I think of the weather? Did I like the apple pie Mrs. Miller made? I would give him one-word answers, but he didn't seem to mind. One day, he brought me a flower, a simple rose from his garden. He just held it out to me, his face a little red, and said, "I thought this might brighten up your room." It was such a small thing, but it was the first small, kind thing anyone had done for me since before. I took the rose, I looked at it, and for the first time in years, I felt a crack in the wall, a tiny hairline fracture. Carl was patient. He was so patient. He courted me for a year before I agreed to marry him. He knew I had secrets. He knew I had pain. He never pushed. He just stayed. His presence was like a warm fire on a cold night. It didn't erase the cold, but it made it bearable. I married Carl. I moved into his farmhouse. I became Martha, the quiet, foreign wife. I learned to love him. It wasn't the fiery, desperate love I had for Stefan. It was a quieter, safer love, a love of comfort and companionship. He gave me a home. He gave me stability. And eventually, he gave me Mark. When Mark was born, I held him in my arms, and for the first time since Daniel, I cried. I cried for Stefan, for Alina, for my mother and father, for my brothers, and for the tiny son I had lost. Carl held me, confused but kind, and let me cry. He never asked why I cried so hard when I should have been happy. He just held me. I poured all my love into Mark. All the love I had been saving, all the love I couldn't give to Daniel, I gave to him. Maybe too much. Maybe I smothered him. Maybe that's why he grew up to be a little selfish, a little thoughtless. He was my whole world, and I think he always felt the weight of that. Carl passed away 10 years ago, a heart attack in the South Field. I mourned him, I missed his steady presence, but I was okay. I had my home, I had my garden, I had my grandson, Tommy. When Mark married Sarah, a city girl with strong opinions, I welcomed her. I gave them space. I helped when I could. And when they had Tommy, my heart, which I thought was a dried-up, empty thing, bloomed again. Holding him was like holding Daniel. It was a second chance. A chance to be a mother again in a small way. I would rock him to sleep and sing the lullabies my mother used to sing to me and Alina. Soft, sad songs from the mountains. I thought I had found peace. I thought the past was finally buried. I had built a good life on top of the ruins, and the grass had grown over it all. Then Sarah told me to leave, and the ruins shifted underneath me. For a moment, I felt like I was back in that camp, having something I loved ripped away from me again. The panic was cold and sharp. But then something different happened. The door in my mind, the one that had slammed shut when they took Daniel, it didn't just stay closed. It opened, just a crack, and instead of the darkness I expected, I saw a sliver of light. I had survived the unsurvivable. I had lost my first love, my first child, my sister, my parents, my home, my country. I had lost everything a person could lose. And yet here I was, an old woman in Ohio with a lifetime behind her. Losing my room, losing my daily time with Tommy, it hurt. It hurt more than I can say. But it wasn't the end of the world. I knew what the end of the world felt like, and this wasn't it. That's why I smiled. I didn't fight Sarah's decision. I packed my brown suitcase. The next morning, I made breakfast for them one last time, pancakes and bacon. Mark sat at the table, his face red, unable to look at me. Sarah kept fussing over Tommy, her back to me. I kissed Tommy on the top of his head, breathing in his little boy smell. Then I picked up my suitcase and walked out the door. I went to a small apartment in town. It was above a bakery, and the smell of bread in the morning was a small comfort. It was strange at first, the silence. No little feet, no television, no arguments, just me and my thoughts. I started going to the library. I would sit in the quiet and read. One day, I found a book about genealogy, about tracing your family history, and it gave me an idea, a crazy idea. I decided to try and find out what happened to my family, to the people I left behind. It took months. I wrote letters to organizations, to government offices in countries I barely recognized on a map. I made phone calls with my shaky English. Most led to dead ends. But then, I got a response from an archive in a city that used to be part of my country. They had records. They had lists from the camps. My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. There it was, typed on faded paper. My name, my mother's name, Alina's name, and then next to Alina's name, a note in a different language. I had a friend at the library translate it for me. It said, transferred to hospital, December 1944. A hospital, not the forest, a hospital. I almost fell off my chair. I spent the next year chasing that single line. I hired a researcher, and eventually we found her. Alina, she was alive. She had been found by a patrol, half dead in the snow after she escaped from that work detail. She had been so ill, so traumatized that she had no memory of who she was. They sent her to a hospital and then to a sanatorium. She had lived her whole life in an institution, a kind, gentle place in the mountains. She never spoke. She just wove baskets and stared at the sky. When I finally went to see her, I was an old woman and she was an old woman. I walked into that sunny room, and there she was, sitting by a window, her silver hair pulled back, her hands idle in her lap. Her eyes were the same sky blue, but they were looking at something far away that I couldn't see. I sat down next to her. I didn't know what to say. After all those years, the words felt too small, so I just started to hum. I hummed one of our mother's lullabies, the one about the mountain stream. She slowly turned her head. Her eyes focused on my face. For a long moment, she just stared. And then a tear slid down her cheek. She lifted her hand, her thin, frail hand, and touched my face. She opened her mouth, and in a voice rusty from disuse, she whispered, "You came back." I held her then. I held my little sister, my shadow, and I wept. The wall I had built so many years ago, it crumbled. All of it. The grief, the guilt, the love, it all came flooding out. We sat there, two old women, holding each other as the sun set over the mountains. I visit her twice a year now. She still doesn't talk much. She doesn't remember the camp or the soldiers or the pain. Her mind just wiped it clean. Maybe that's a gift, but she remembers me. She remembers the lullabies. She knows I'm her sister. So you see, when my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled because I knew something she didn't. I knew that the worst thing in the world isn't losing your home or your comfort. The worst thing is losing hope. And I had found mine again. Not in a house, or in a family, or in a child. I found it in a dusty archive, in a single line of text, and in the face of a sister I thought I'd never see again. My son, Mark, he came to visit me last week. He sat in my little apartment looking around at the sparse furniture. He apologized. He said Sarah was wrong. He said they missed me. He asked me to come home. I looked at him, my boy, my whole world for so long, and I smiled, the same smile. I have a home, Mark, I told him, and I have a sister I need to visit, but I would love it if you and Tommy came to see me. And maybe next time you could bring me one of my rose bushes from the garden. He didn't understand. He looked confused, but he nodded. He's trying, and that's enough. Life isn't about the big, dramatic moments. It's about the small, quiet ones. It's about the crack in the wall that lets the light in. It's about finding your sister after 60 years. It's about the smell of bread in the morning. It's about knowing that you can survive the unsurvivable, and that on the other side of the deepest darkness, there can still be a sliver of light. My name is Martha, and this was my story. Thank you for listening.